What? Press play? What?
Hello, Matt. You don't know me, but I know you. I want to play a game. This year, you've sat there like a voyeur, arrogantly judging movies based off your own desires. Society would call you a movie critic, but I would call you a pussy. Here are the rules to the game. To win, you must correctly rank the top 10 horror movies of 2023. Here's what happens if you lose. This messy room will become your chamber, and you'll be forced to watch the worst movies of 2023 again and again and again. Your brain will be permanently scarred from the terrible storylines and overusage of CGI. Think of it like a movie theater in hell. But if you win, you are free to enjoy all that cinema has to offer in 2024. Live or die, make your choice.
All right. Sounds like I have to correctly rank the 10 best horror movies of 2023, or else I'll be stuck in here forever watching the worst horror movies of 2023. All right, well, I don't want to be in here much longer, so let's get to it. Now, obviously, I didn't see every horror movie that came out this year. I've got 2 small kids, I've got a full-time job. Also, this year was kind of a year where I caught up on a lot of like the classics that I either hadn't seen before or I just hadn't seen in a long time. Now, in my opinion, 2023 was a solid year for horror. Not great, but not bad. But I really don't think there are any like all-time classics that came out this year. Now, of course, this top 10 list isn't just movies that I think looked the best or had the best storylines this year. These are just the top 10 horror movies that I personally enjoyed the most this year. Now, I just want to mention something really quick. Apologies if you've already seen my best and worst horror movies of 2023 video that I just recently posted. I thought I was done watching horror movies for the rest of the year. I didn't think I had any more time. But over the past week, I watched 3 more that I thought would be pretty good and might make the top 10 list. And one of them did end up making the top 10 list. So if you're wondering, why wasn't that movie in the other video? That's just kind of why. I wasn't really expecting that. So sorry about that. I just wanted to point that out. But anyways, let's get into my 10 best horror movies of 2023.
Who gives a fuck about movies?
All right, at number 10, we've got The Last Voyage of the Demeter, which came out in August. All right, now this movie is an adaptation of the Captain's Log chapter, which came out from the 1897 Dracula book. And I think it's interesting how this movie shows you the ending to the movie first, and then we kind of go back in time and then just kind of see how everything plays out. I also like this version of Dracula, this like grittier, scarier, more brutal version of Dracula is always something that I kind of lean towards. There's also some really good moments on the deck of the ship, especially at night, where Dracula's kind of creeping around in the shadows, which is pretty damn scary. I definitely think, though, they underutilized Liam Cunningham's character as the captain. I just wish we would have gotten more from his character, and I wish he would have taken like a little bit more of like the lead role in what's all going down. He's a pretty badass actor. You remember him probably from Game of Thrones, but I just wish we would have seen more from him. But I also like the idea that this isn't just like a bunch of ball-scratching, blue-collar dudes on a boat getting pecked off one by one. They do incorporate like a little kid in the story. They also incorporate this woman later on in the story, which does add like a unique kind of interesting aspect to it, just as kind of the story plays out. I also think the sound design in this movie is great. There's one moment in particular where a guy is looking for Dracula at night on the kind of the deck of the boat, and there's like blood slowly dripping onto his white shirt, and the sound is like boom, boom, boom every time it drips onto his shirt. But that's just an example of some of like the really good sound design and some of the really, really effective music in this movie. But all in all, this movie cracks my top 10 because I like this take on Dracula and I just enjoyed the movie. I also like this aspect of this crew stuck out at sea where it's like, no matter how loud you scream, nobody's gonna hear you. It's almost like that old Alien quote. It's like when you're out in space, it doesn't matter how loud you scream, nobody's gonna hear your ass. And I just like that aspect of the movie and adds like an extra layer of creepiness to it. And I also like the end of the movie. I like how it ends in London and there's some ambiguity there too, and kind of gets me like a little bit excited for a sequel. So there you go, The Last Voyage of the Demeter coming in at number 10. All right, now at number 9 is going to be Knock at the Cabin. This is the newest M. Night Shyamalan movie, and I'm kind of a sucker for M. Night Shyamalan movies, and that's probably just because of my age. Like the peak M. Night years were like those like years where I was kind of cutting my teeth in the horror genre to an extent. And I like how this movie kind of takes place at like this remote cabin. These people show up while these people are staying there, and you really don't know for a while like what their motive is. Are they bad people? Do they have good intentions? You just don't know, and I like that aspect of it. And then we follow these characters as we kind of see their thoughts unwind on like whether or not they believe this story that's been told to them, whether they think these people are like batshit crazy, or one of them is like kind of starting to believe it a little bit. I like how M. Night kind of like weaves that story and shows like the emotions of how each character is kind of evolving with this scary stuff that's just like been brought upon them. This movie also has some pretty damn sad moments at times. Like there was definitely a moment in this movie where I can't lie, I definitely teared up a little bit. But I think it's a unique take on kind of an end of the storyline approach. I also think Dave Bautista does a really, really good job in this movie. At first, you think he's like this like menacing, like scary, like intimidating character, but he ends up being like this more soft-spoken leader of the group in a sense. But overall, he just does a really, really good job in his role and is definitely like the one that pops off the screen to me. This is definitely not one of M. Night Shyamalan's best movies that he's ever made, but I had a good time overall with the movie, I would say. Like I said, this isn't the best year for horror in general, so this movie, like on a really, really good year, probably wouldn't even crack my top 10 or top 15. But all in all, I did have a good time with Knock at the Cabin, and that's a big reason why it comes in at number 9 for me. All right, coming in at number 8 is going to be Five Nights at Freddy's. All right, now obviously this movie's been a huge success, making like damn near $300 million, but I had a good time with this movie. And unlike another movie I'll mention later that has animatronics in it too, overall, for most of this movie, I had a good time throughout. And I don't know, maybe it's because I grew up with Chuck E. Cheese's like pretty much everywhere. So this whole like kid play place with animatronics that's kind of creepy and probably a little bit smelly with cheese pizza probably smeared on the floor somewhere. I don't know, it's just kind of like a little bit nostalgic to me, I guess you could say in a way. I also think Josh Hutcherson as Mike in this story does a good job in his role, and I definitely found myself rooting for his character, just like wanting to see him like finally get a W after like all this terrible stuff that has happened to him. I also really like Matthew Lillard in this role. I think he did a really good job, and it's also great to see him like back in the horror genre doing his thing. Thought the animatronics in the movie were really, really solid. Also, this is a PG-13 movie, and surprisingly, there were a couple moments that actually had some pretty good gore. I mean, I get why this movie is so popular. Of course, you've got like the video game and all that kind of stuff, but personally, do I think this movie is a classic or anything like that? No, but I had a pretty good time throughout the entire movie. All right, coming up next is a much less like mainstream successful movie, a movie that wasn't released in theaters. It just came out on Hulu, that's it. And it is called No One Will Save You. I'm a big sci-fi horror fan, and No One Will Save You is essentially mostly like a silent alien invasion movie. I thought the movie had some pretty solid jump scares throughout it, and this movie is one of those movies that really 99% of the movie focuses on one person. And I thought Caitlin Dever as Bryn in this movie absolutely kills it in this role, and I'm definitely looking forward to seeing her in more stuff. And I'm telling you guys, if this isn't proof that some scenes, especially in horror, don't need any dialogue, then I don't really know what to say. I mean, this movie is a perfect example of like how the movie's shot, the sound design and the acting, the physical acting and stuff like that, and just how like the creatures look and other things like that can be so effective, and how in certain scenes you just don't need dialogue. And yeah, like I said, there is basically no dialogue in this movie. There's a tiny bit of dialogue, but pretty much through 99% of the movie, nobody says any words at all. I mean, like, take an iconic movie like Signs, for example. We were just talking about M. Night a second ago, like Signs. Some of the most iconic scenes in that movie, if you go back and watch it, trust me, have zero dialogue at all. And those scenes are so damn intense. It's just like those little subtleties and nuances that really matter to me. Like, let's stop trying to be too cute with our dialogue or too smart with our dialogue and just keep it simple and focus on the other important things in the story. It's even that old tactic that some of the most iconic play-by-play sports announcers have always used. It's like when you have a big moment in sports and you're supposed to be narrating that moment, they know when those moments are where you just need to shut the fuck up and let the moment consume the moment. But back to the movie. So even in the opening scene, it makes you wonder, like, why is she getting all these bad looks from the people in town? What happened to her mom? What's going on with her friend who she grew up with? What's the whole story behind that? It just makes you want to kind of figure out what happened to these people as the story plays out and keeps you engaged. We also get to witness the alien pretty early on in this movie, and I'm a little bit mixed on how early they showed all of the alien. Traditionally, I don't really like that. I like it when they keep it in the shadows through like 90% of the movie. But I think they did a good enough job in the first like 20 minutes of the movie, kind of just showing the alien like in shadows or in like mirror reflections and stuff like that. But overall, I think they did do a good enough job with like the aliens in this movie and the CGI in this movie. So it wasn't too distracting, even though they do show the alien, like all of the alien throughout most of the movie. I also think they do a really good job in this movie, keeping you wondering, like, what are the aliens' motive here? Are they hostile? Are they not hostile? Are they doing tests here? Like, what's going on? What's going to happen to this town? What's going to happen to our main character? They're almost like playing with her in a way, and I think they just do a really good job making you think about what's really happening here. But overall, we've got a really strong casting with our main character who's the focal point throughout the entire story. We've got some really, really good sound design in this movie, some good looking aliens in this movie. We've got a very emotional, like, underlying story to this movie as well. And I'm a big sucker for like sci-fi, alien invasion stuff. So that's a big reason why this movie comes in at number 7 for me. All right, next up at number 6 is going to be one of the newest slashers that came out this year, which is Totally Killer. So this is another one of those kind of like silly comedy slashers that we've been seeing a lot of recently. This one in particular kind of takes like a Back to the Future approach and then adds like a time traveling slasher whodunit approach to it, essentially. Now, what's crazy about this movie is after like the first 15 minutes of this movie, I almost turned it off. I didn't like it at all throughout the first 15 minutes of the movie, but that was really just because I didn't know what this movie was. I didn't know what kind of tone they were going for. I didn't really know what kind of jokes they were going for. But once I understood, okay, this is what they're trying to do here, I actually really, really enjoyed this movie. One thing I really liked about this movie is how they made fun of both generations in the movie. They make fun of kids nowadays, and then they also make fun of all of the crazy shit people were doing in the 80s. I mean, every generation has ridiculous things that they do. So it was nice in this movie how they didn't pick a side, they just kind of made fun of both. Like, for example, they show this mom chain smoking cigarettes in her car with her kids in the car. And then they also show some of like the off-color jokes that people used to say like regularly in the 80s, of course. And then they go about just like making fun of our main character at times with some of like just the woke stuff that she's kind of saying when she goes back in the 80s and everyone's like, what are you talking about? But yes, is the reveal at the end very predictable? And yes, is some of the CGI, especially at the end, pretty damn bad? Yes, it is, of course. But overall, I actually really, really like the way the killer looked. We've got some pretty brutal kills here. And unlike a movie like It's a Wonderful Knife, which is supposed to be a comedy slasher, but doesn't really have any comedy, this movie actually has some genuinely funny moments in it. And just overall, I had a really good time with Totally Killer. And if you haven't seen it, I definitely recommend checking it out. So yes, we did get a new Scream movie in 2023, and coming in at number 5 on my top 10 list is gonna be Scream 6. And this time we've got Ghostface in New York, and I'm just a big Scream fan. I like what Scream has done for the genre. I love the original. I love pretty much every movie in the franchise. And I like I said, I like what Scream has done for the genre. I'm a big fan of movies like I Know What You Did Last Summer and even the sequel. Now, I was a little bit higher on this movie when I first saw it, and when it first came out, I saw it twice in the theater right away. So it's gone down just a little bit for me, but I still do really like this movie. I thought the new New York setting in this movie was great. I also think the opening in Scream 6 is one of the best openings in the entire franchise. It also has like a unique little twist in the opening too, something we've never seen in the entire franchise, so that was cool. This is also probably the most brutal Ghostface in the entire franchise. Now, there is kind of like a charm with the other Ghostfaces, how they're like kind of clumsy and like a little bit more human-like, or like the Killer Next Door kind of a style. I do like that, but I also really like the Ghostface in this movie, just how brutal and like just how vicious the Ghostface is in this movie. There's also some really damn tense moments in this movie, and that's a big reason why this movie is in the spot that it is for me. You've got the ladder scene, which is pretty intense. You've also got that Quickie Mart scene with Melissa's character and Jenna Ortega's character. That whole scene is really good. Just a couple examples of like the really tense moments in this movie. I really like the nostalgia that they gave us with the whole Ghostface shrine in this movie. I really enjoyed that. I also thought the characters in this movie were way better than in Scream 5. The way the characters, especially the core four, were written, I thought were way better than they were in Scream 5. I know a lot of people probably feel the same, but I also think this is one of the best Gales we've ever seen in the franchise. This is also the first time Gale has ever spoken to Ghostface on the phone in this movie. So that's kind of cool. And I know the plot armor in this movie was pretty ridiculous, and this is possibly like the worst Ghostface reveal in the entire franchise. But regardless of that, I really like the new setting. The kills are great in this movie. It's tense. And overall, it just gives you good Scream vibes. And that's a big reason why it sits in this spot for me. All right, not only did we get a new Scream this year, but we also got a new Saw movie. So coming in at number 4 is going to be Saw X. So in the Saw timeline, Saw X fits between the original from 2004 and Saw 2, just right there. But what's unique about Saw X compared to the rest of the franchise is this movie mainly focuses on John Kramer exclusively. And yeah, John's still doing brutal stuff to people in this movie, but you empathize with his character in this movie. These aren't just victims who did random stuff out in society somewhere or something like that. These are people who did something horrible to John Kramer himself, and now he's trying to get revenge and teach them a lesson, and you root for his character. And now, as far as the traps go in this movie, do I think these are like the best traps I've ever seen? No, probably not, but they are still really solid and pretty damn brutal. The gore is definitely on point in this movie. They also introduce a new villain in the timeline, which I enjoy. And really, overall, this is a really solid Saw movie. I can definitely understand if some people have this as like their number one horror movie of the year. It's not just a Saw movie where you watch people get tortured for 90 minutes. There's a pretty strong like storyline here, which is surprising for a Saw movie. But I don't know. I just really like Saw X. All right, coming in at number 3 is going to be Eli Roth's Thanksgiving. Now, as a lot of you guys already know, I'm a huge slasher fan. I'm also a pretty big fan of like Eli Roth's work just in general. Now, and Eli Roth definitely has his stamp on this movie throughout the entire movie. We get some amazing over-the-top gruesome gore in this movie, and there's just some really solid kills in this movie that'll either make you laugh when you watch the kill or make you say, holy shit. I also think John Carver as the killer in this movie is really good. I like the way the killer looks in this movie. Yes, the characters overall are pretty bad. Their dialogue is pretty bad. They're pretty forgettable, but Patrick Dempsey, I think, does a really good job in this movie. Now, as far as the whodunit aspect and the reveal at the end of the movie, I didn't hate it. Did it blow me away? No, but like I said, I didn't hate it. I definitely think the reveal in this movie is way better than the reveal in Scream 6, though. But overall, the gore in this movie is top notch. You've got some great Thanksgiving vibes. There's some really tense moments at John Carver's headquarters. And really, one of the biggest reasons why this movie is in my top 3 is simply just because this is a movie I'll definitely go back and rewatch a bunch. And at number 2, I've got Talk to Me, which is an Australian film directed by two brothers, Danny and Michael Philippou, which is awesome. I just love the whole backstory on how this movie got made. I remember watching the clip of them at Sundance with the cast. finding out that their movie was going to be purchased and distributed in theaters and stuff like that. It was just a really cool moment, and I just love like the whole backstory on how this movie was made. But this is another one of those movies where they take a pretty generic, done before kind of concept and then put their own unique twist on it and make it really, really fun. There's also something to be said about having a prop in a movie become so iconic so early on, and they definitely nailed that with the hand in this movie. This movie's kind of like the new Ouija board kind of a thing in a sense that you would do at a party or at a sleepover or something like that. And I also think they do a really good job in this movie showing what a real like kickback or party would even look like. And how at these parties, you've got this thing, it's like a new drug or some sort of alcohol or something like that. And you've got this hand, it's just this new thing that everybody's kind of excited about to get like a new thrill or kind of escape their problems from. And this hand gives them the opportunity to like get a thrill out of it by kind of like crossing over into a new dimension in a sense. I think the scary stuff in this movie is pulled off really, really well. I also think Sophie Wilde as Mia in this movie, she does a really good job in that role. And this movie definitely has some pretty damn scary moments and digs into some pretty deep stuff, but helps to offset that by having a lot of fun moments too. It's just a good time and has enough unique things in it to like the typical demonic possession stuff that we haven't seen before that makes like a new, fun, interesting experience. So there you go. Talk to Me, my second favorite horror movie of 2023. All right, before I give you my number one horror movie of 2023, though, I want to shout out 3 honorable mentions first. First, I want to mention Evil Dead Rise, which made like $145 million this year and is definitely the goriest movie I saw this year. Now, this movie definitely excels and does a really good job with some of the more gimmicky horror stuff, like the fly on the eyeball scene or like the glass eating scene, stuff like that, or really anything they do with the character Ellie in this movie. But to me, just the underlying possession story of a kid who finds a book, opens this book they're not supposed to, and it essentially like unleashes this demon who causes a bunch of havoc on the people around them. It's just really not something that blows my hair back. I also really didn't like the characters that much, but this movie does have some really, really good gore, some great visuals, and I can see why people really do like this movie. And the next honorable mention is going to be a slasher movie called Sick, which takes place in 2020, so it has kind of like a pandemic twist to it. This one's written by Kevin Williamson, who you probably remember wrote the original Scream, Scream 2, Scream 4, I Know What You Did Last Summer, Dawson's Creek, all that kind of stuff. And I can't lie, I'm a big fan of Kevin Williamson's work. This one does have some really fun slasher elements to it, and it has a pretty fun setting, like at this big, massive cabin in the mountains. But the reason why this movie doesn't crack my top 10 is because the movie makes no effort to make you care about the reveal. And some of the pandemic stuff is pretty cringy at times, especially now that we're 3 years away from 2020. And lastly is going to be Megan, which is a decent enough PG-13 horror movie with some okay comedy kind of aspects to it. All right, at number 1 as my favorite horror movie of 2023 is going to be When Evil Lurks. This movie definitely owns the most shocking horror moment of the entire year for me. This is a supernatural, demonic horror movie which was filmed in Argentina. And besides the subtitles, of course, you can just feel throughout this movie how non-Hollywood it is, in my opinion. This movie gives zero shits about pushing any kind of agenda. It just wants to be as gritty and as scary and as relentless as it possibly can. And this movie does not let up until the credits roll. The acting here is top-notch, especially Ezekiel Rodriguez as Pedro just absolutely crushes it in this movie. The practical effects in this movie with the kills are done really, really well. Also, the practical effects with the people who are rotten or possessed are just like grimy and nasty and done so damn well. This movie is also really emotional at times. Not only do you have like this demon who is now in their area, but you've also got all these underlying storylines with Pedro and his family, his autistic kid, this dynamic with his wife. There's just a lot going on. So not only is it scary throughout the entire movie, but you've also got this aspect to our main character that's really interesting, makes you feel for him, and is just pretty damn emotional. There's also some moments in this movie that'll catch you way off guard. You will not expect some things in this movie that will just suddenly happen, and your eyes will be so wide, like, what did I just see? I also think the child actors in this movie are fantastic. There's a moment at the third act with some kids that is really, really creepy and just pulled off really well. It's just an amazing, relentless, scary journey from beginning till end. And I'm definitely looking forward to seeing more stuff from Damien Rugna, the director of this movie. But there you go. When Evil Lurks, my #1 horror movie of 2023. All right. Now it's time to find out how we did.
Congratulations. You have correctly ranked the 10 best horror movies of 2023. Most people are so ungrateful to be able to freely watch movies every year. But not you. Not anymore.
Thank God. Thank God.
Pussy.